Welcome to the Spent the Rent podcast. I am your host, Patty Rose. I have two guests today. My guests today are Chief Chris Heppel from the Eugene Springfield Fire Department and Springfield City Councilor Sean Van Gordon. Guys, thanks for coming to this and thanks for doing this.
Yeah, good morning, Patty. Happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Glad to join you on a Saturday morning.
Yeah, so this is, ballots will be going out on the 14th. That's what I've been told. That's the big date that they'll start to hit the mail. I got my voters pamphlet the other day. So we're here to discuss ballot measure 20-311, the Springfield Fire Department levy. And so let's just get to it. Actually, first, I want to talk for people that are unaware, because I don't know a ton about this. And this question is for you, Chief Heppel. Can you tell us how the 2014 merger of the Eugene Springfield Fire Department worked and how it's been financially beneficial and, that kind of stuff, and how that whole thing is set up? Because I think for a lot of people, now this is specifically for Springfield, the ballot measure we'll be talking about, but tell us how the two fire departments merging works.
Sure, happy to. So actually, Eugene Fire and Springfield Fire and Life Safety have been working together since around 2005. So we've actually been working in collaboration with each other for 15 years. It's not new. And we started early on, even before 2014, with just the sharing of resources. It's when it comes to emergency services and public safety, the more we can collaborate, the more efficient we are as a region. And that's a little bit of the approach we took, was from a regional approach. And so we started running calls together, and then training came together, and then some administration, then ambulance systems, and et cetera. And then in 2014, we brought the whole system together. So all of our stations. And today we operate as regardless of geopolitical boundaries. So what does that mean is that both cities put in their resources to make sure both cities are covered, as well as their contracted districts, because we also have both cities in 7 contract districts that we provide services to, which are surround the cities. And then we provide the best, most efficient level of service we can with the resources we have. So it's not uncommon that a Springfield fire engine would come into Eugene, or a Eugene engine would go into Springfield. And the reason being is if the closest resource is from either respective side, that's the right thing to do.
Right.
Is to get the quick response, to get care or fire suppression to the site as quickly as we can, and that's the efficiency that we have with it. And then the other part is we're just able to share, so it's much easier as a combined organization with a single operational structure. And so that also leads out into other things with purchasing of fire hose. Instead of 2 agencies, we can now purchase more in a bulk and get a better discount. Right. And then we do a single logistics system. So those are some of the advantages that have been born from this merger, as well as overhead. You only need 1 fire chief instead of 2 now, right? Yeah. So that saves you some money. And then there are other savings as we work down through our organization with training, administration, logistics, and even on the line with our folks working the ambulances and fire trucks.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just makes sense, to outside people when they first come to the area. Eugene Springfield is pretty much one entity until they really learn the nuances and all that stuff. So today we're talking, like I said before, about Springfield Fire specifically. So can you give us a quick overview of Springfield specifically, the 5 locations, 5 trucks, if that's what I understood correctly, and that this levy is designed for fire station number 3 on 28th Street. Is that correct?
So it's so let me drill down a little bit on the Springfield side. So the entire department, we run 16 stations 24/7. Our 16th station is actually the airport, and that has its own different funding mechanism through the airport and the FAA, because we're required to have those things there because of the airline traffic. So that gives us 10 stations on the Eugene side and 5 stations on the Springfield side. And that's where we've been in terms of stations for quite a while now. In terms of what specifically we're staffing, so we staff 4 engines per day. And so the engines are what you commonly see going to calls that have the hose in the back. They have a pump, they bring water, they bring a medical care, and three crew members. And then we staff 1 ladder. So that's going to be the bigger truck with the big ladder on top of it. And that's also, we refer to that as our rolling toolbox. So that has all of our stuff in it for like vehicle extrication. If you've got to cut people out of cars or some type of a rescue. Also on fires, they would go in and they ventilate and get rid of the smoke, or they'll breach walls or anything really that needs to be done other than putting wet stuff on the red stuff.
Right.
Is the analogy we use. We also operate 3 advanced life support ambulances, which is staffed with 2 paramedics. And then we staff 1 12-hour basic life support ambulance, which we utilize for our lower acuity calls. So folks that may have just experienced a slip, trip, or fall, and they've got, an ankle fracture, but still need to go to the hospital, but it doesn't need that high level of care. You just need that basic splinting and transportation to the appropriate level of care. And then if we need to, we can rotate staff to specialized apparatus depending on a call. So for example, if they're going to one of our contract districts where there's not a water hydrant system, we have to bring more water with us. We would do that with a tender, and we have a 3,000 gallon tender for that. We also have apparatus for operating in more of the urban interface area. So when we were working up on the Holiday Farm fire, we've got a couple of 4-wheel drive, higher lifted type apparatus, or a little bit smaller for getting into those tighter areas for better access. And then we also, with both rivers coming along each side of Springfield, we've got a pretty substantial water rescue role. So we've got water rescue boats, and then we have a reserve ambulance. So if we have one of the higher than normal call volume for ambulance calls, we can staff up an additional ambulance. So that's kind of what we call our deployment, our daily deployment on the Springfield side. And to answer your question, specifically for Station 3, it's not necessarily specifically for Station 3. It's predominantly for 8 personnel, or what we call FTE, full-time equivalent, and then the associated training, maintenance, equipment that would go with supporting those folks, as well as our normal operating pieces.
Right. And we're going to get to that in a little bit, exactly what this funding would go towards. I'm not sure which one of you guys would want to answer this. Commissioner Van Gordon, this might be for you, but if so where's it at? What will the passing of the levy cover in regards to operating costs? I think both of you could probably answer that. But yeah, what would the passing of this, and you kind of just touched on it, Chief Heppel, about, 8 positions. So yeah, what would the passing of this cover, essentially?
Counselor, you want to jump in? You want me to go?
Well, why don't you go about the technical piece, and I'll give a little bit more higher level piece about the budget.
Sure. So the big piece here is that this is the 5th time that we have requested this levy. And over the years, we've actually brought the number of staffing required on this levy or supporting this levy down. We've incorporated it into our general fund. So that's a good direction with that piece. The other piece is that, I usually get the question of, so what if the levy doesn't pass? Well, the impact of that is we're not able to sustain our current system of delivery. So right now, we do very well in terms of our having a first response apparatus on scene within 6 to 7 minutes. We have a very good cardiac arrest success rate because of the training, not only the training we do, but also our ability to get folks onto scene very quickly to do things like chest compressions and provide ventilations, provide the AED or automated electronic defibrillator type of care. We use a little bit more advanced system than that, but that's what folks understand. So if we start reducing our current staffing, then that's going to have a direct impact on our service delivery, which would increase response times and decrease the availability of staff to respond on a normal basis.
So then I'll give a little bit more context for the higher level budget. One of the things I think the public doesn't see when you talk about finances and at a city level is in Springfield, right? The amount of general fund, your property tax money, right? The fire and police spend more than what we take in property taxes on any given year. So like there's financing in a public entity is relatively complex. So understanding that this levy is going to fund those 8 positions that go into our current staffing model is probably the critical piece. And then the number that you kind of have to think of is our staffing has relatively stayed flat in the last 25 years. And then call volume has gone up over about 40 years, like in the 900% range. Some of that's like population growth, things like that.
Sure.
So this money funds people that we have out there today responding to emergencies today. And so the context, I think it's important for the public to see, is that this is going to be the fifth time we do this. So this has been happened since about 2002. And understanding that we as a council really have chosen to absorb a lot of the increase in costs over the last 20 years back into that general fund through just being creative and finding the money and just prioritization. So really, I think that's the context the voters need to hopefully understand, is that it's funding the staffing that exists on the street today, like we have the last 20 years.
And it can affect everything else if it doesn't. So that's very important. I don't know who in their right mind wouldn't want to support the fire department right now, after what we've been through. And we'll get to that even more in a little bit. So this question again is for you, Commissioner Van Gordon. How does the funding structure of the levy ensure that the tax dollars from Springfield residents stay in Springfield?
So when it comes to the merged fire department, the actual funding is done separately on both sides of on both sides of the freeway. So when we as a city we take Springfield dollars, which the city would collect these levy dollars, and then we choose what level of fire service that we want at the city level. So the chief actually manages two separate budgets, and they're sort of kept, they're kept light years apart. So dollars that Springfield spends buys services on the Springfield side.
Okay. Yeah, that answers that well. So how much of an increase in tax is it to an average Springfield residents? And we talked about how these levies are really common. So can you speak on like what is the cause of an increased yearly budget?
So yeah, I think there's two interesting questions in here, right? So the average number in the literature is the average taxpayer is paying about $65 a year across this levy, and then this is the increase that we asked for is about a $6 increase annually. Now, when you read the literature, it's going to refer to $175,000 a year tax, assessed value. So just keep in mind that when you talk about taxes, you're talking about the assessed value of your home, not your market value. So we all get taxed on a much lower level than what our home's valued at. So it seems relevant. So a lot of places in post Measure 5, right, like in the property tax measures in the 90s, cities have come back to these operating levies. We use two of them in the city. There's a public safety levy for police, and then a fire levy for fire that allows people to fund operations and the voters to sort of tax themselves to fund additional operations, which is kind of the context of how you get this far. The interesting thing is when you choose to do that, you cannot have that levy out there more than 5 years. So under state law, we ask the voters, hey, look, do we want to increase our taxes for fire? We have to say, hey, look, do you want to increase your taxes for 5 years? And in 5 more years, we would come back and ask you.
Yeah.
Yep. So in 2025, we'll be back having this conversation again.
Right. I'll just copy and paste this interview. This question is for you, Chief Heppel. We kind of touched on it about the 8 positions, but the website also touched on it. So the question, the way I wrote it, was the website indicates the passing of the levy would fund 8 firefighter paramedic positions and staff one of the 5 existing fire trucks dedicated to Springfield. Would these positions be new or existing staff?
They're existing staff. As Councilor Van Gordon said, we actually haven't expanded our fire capability, especially our fire suppression capability in over 20 years.
Yeah.
We haven't built a new station. We haven't added an engine. We haven't added a truck. But counter to that, our call volume has gone up exponentially.
Yeah.
So let's just say our folks are very busy 24/7, very, very busy. As a whole, our system, in my entire system, we see over 40,000 calls for service a year. We transport over 22,000 patients a year.
Wow.
So if you were to compare that to, the population of Lane County, we transport a large portion of Lane County in the back of our ambulances annually.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So pretty important. One thing that maybe Councilor Van Gordon can talk about, the effect with COVID on city government's funding is going to be devastating. So this is going to be really big. Yeah, maybe you can touch on that and why this is so important right now, because in the coming years, what that's going to look like for city government with just funding.
Yeah, like across state and local governments, I haven't talked to a colleague that is an elected official in a state, either in a local government at any level, that is not continues to worry about their funding in the 5-year range. A lot of times I don't think we're fully around, what is the implication of, to the public dollars, because we're in a bad recession. People are hurting, right? And once at some point that we're going to get to a point where we're going to, have to figure out how to close that gap, right? Because our hospitality industry is hurting really bad, and that's a huge part of Lane County. Like, I don't really see us getting out of this recession as Lane County until we can be down at Autzen with 60,000 of our fellow friends, right, sharing out on Saturday, right? Those are huge drivers to our economy. So being able to solidify the financing around the fire department is going to let us sort of focus on business redevelopment, understanding and making sure the budget continues to be balanced, and making sure that we're providing as much in the way of services as possible in the next coming years.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, for anybody listening or watching this, I think it's just really important that this passes, because, like we kind of touched on before, that if this doesn't pass, then it gets, we have to kind of dip into the general fund, and then that covers all the other things. And so it just makes everything a lot more difficult. So if we can kind of just do each one thing at a time, then that's a really good way to go about it. For Chief Heppel, I want to ask you about COVID as well. How has COVID affected, everything with your department?
Well, certainly it has changed the way in which we respond. So our, the precautions we have to take, especially with the unfortunate rise in cases in Lane County over the last 3 weeks, all going on 4 weeks now, puts our folks into a much just more dangerous situation.
Yeah.
We're the ones that are responding in the street to manage and deal with our community members who are experiencing COVID. It's not uncommon that we will transport someone who is COVID positive, and they're isolating or quarantining at home appropriately, but their condition worsens, so they might be developing what we call primary symptoms, which are shortness of breath, low blood pressure, maybe cardiac chest pain, et cetera, which requires intervention on our part, and then continued care in the hospital setting. So the precautions and the environment is very different. Many times, the way we interact with folks is very different. Traditionally, we're that public entity who goes into people's homes on a daily basis. We're invited in every day, about 150 times a day. And now, it's not uncommon. The interaction might be, hey, can you please come outside? If the person we're here to see, can they come to the porch? And the reason for that is not from a, customer service perspective. It's for everybody's safety. We know that it's safe to be outside, right, in those environments. And we make sure our folks have the proper personal protective equipment, but we also make sure the folks we're caring for are properly have the proper treatment, but also equipment with them too. So we mask those folks. And anyway, just a lot more precautions.
Yeah.
Our handoffs to the hospital is very different, et cetera. And there's also an associative cost with that, where we deal with normal respiratory problems annually is during our flu season. So we see it there, but now we're using that same equipment, the mask, the gloves, the eye protection, the gowns, every day. So that has a impact on our costs as well.
Would you say that so firefighters, everyone thinks fire, but I think paramedics is probably one of the more common sides of it. Is that true?
Yeah, about 80 to 85% of our entire call volume is emergency medical services.
Right. And that was something, I think that a lot of people don't realize that. I have a couple friends that one of my good friends, his younger brother was an aspiring firefighter. He worked in Salem for a while. I'm not sure what he's doing now, but yeah. So that was the part of it that I remember when I first heard that, he was like, no, it's more paramedics than anything else. But so if there's anything else that you guys want to touch on before I move on, because I want to ask you before we get out of here a little bit about the Holiday Farms fire. So is there anything, Counselor Van Gordon, that you'd like to add before we move on?
I think the thing that I would like to add is really that, you know, we talked a lot about call volume and how it goes and how it's gone up substantially over the last couple of years, right? And I'm just simply speaking from the Springfield side, and some of this is sort of in the Lane County, you know, goes into Lane County as well. But you see that the fire service relying more and more on cahoots, right? To help and grow that sort of service. In Springfield, we have 24-hour cahoots. And you know, a lot of the discussion is how that impacts police right now. In some cases, that's helping the fire department as well. You know, they've changed transporting contracts, right, to bring in third-party providers. I think the chief can sort of touch on a couple of the other elements, but there's been a effort the last probably 10 years to really look at the right level of, you know, the complexity of a case and try to get that transport into a different level so that we can get into a more sustainable funding model. I think that's really an important point.
And then, yeah, Chief Heppel, if there's anything else you'd like to add before we move on.
Yeah. So one of the questions I get is how can you have, you know, the same staffing level, but have this exponential increase in call volume? And the way that we've mitigated that is what I call is our patient rights. And so we're trying to get the right patient, the right level of care to their side, transported by the right type of transportation to the right destination for the right price. So as you can imagine, we see a full spectrum of acuity within our emergency medical system. So I use the example of the rolled or broken ankle. You know, that requires a lower level of care versus someone who may be experiencing cardiac arrest, needs CPR. And so over the years, we've done things such as we use what's called the Clausen's triage system. So when a community member calls 911 and we ask a series of questions, the whole purpose of that series of questions is to make sure we're getting the 5 rights. So instead of getting you know, a big fire truck and an ambulance to every call, maybe all you need is just a basic life support ambulance because it's that rolled ankle. But on the flip side, if it's that cardiac arrest, we want to get, you know, the appropriate level, which would be 2 engines, an ambulance, and a chief to that call in a very timely manner. So we do triage that way. The other piece we did is years ago, we contracted with a non-emergency transport provider who's been here in our area now since 2014, 2015. And they deal with a lot of our long-term care facilities. So we have a number of those in the Springfield area. And they manage those calls because typically they're lower acuity or folks need to go to appointments or just get something taken care of at the hospital and then they come right back. They take care of those call volumes for us. And then we introduced our basic life support program, which I've mentioned already, in fact, 4 years ago this month. And the great part about that is that's an opportunity for folks who are literally high school graduates, and you go to Lane Community College, you do 1 or 2 terms at what we call the EMT program. You have that as well as a good driver's license and a good background check. And we bring you on to the department and put you through a 3-week basic life support academy. And after that, you're on the road running calls with folks who do this for a profession.
Wow.
And it's a great opportunity for folks. We pay an hourly wage. You get a healthcare package. You become a PERS employee. And it's a 3-year limited duration program. And the key is that we continue to work with folks, one on their physical agility to move up to be a firefighter paramedic, but we also work with them while they're going through paramedic school in terms of their schedule. Wow. So in the last 4 years, we've brought up over 30 people out of the basic life support program to become firefighter paramedics. And it's been amazingly successful. And ultimately, it's provided an opportunity for people in our community who may have not had access to be a member of our team to actually come on board early on in life and be a part of something amazing.
That's pretty cool. So how can people get involved with that? Is it on your website?
Yeah. So the big piece there is if you go to the Eugene Springfield website, we talk about our basic life support program there. Our hiring for that program comes through our Eugene side. So if you look at the Eugene jobs, we do 2, if not 3 hirings a year. In fact, we've transitioned to background checks right now. So we'll be starting our next BLS Academy in November, and we'll probably do another one in the spring. Wow. Typically, we'll bring on 6 to 10 members per hiring. And so there's definitely opportunity there. And the reason why we bring on those many folks a year is many folks go one of two ways. One is they move up to become a firefighter paramedic in an organization and choose this as a career. But the flip side is we've seen so many people go off to other careers. We've had folks that have gone off to become nurses, physician assistants. We've got one in medical school now. Folks really see this as an entry-level opportunity to go, is this something I want to do, taking care of people? And then what type of environment do I want to do that in? Yeah. Is it a clinical setting, at a hospital, et cetera? So
it's really cool for people to have a little bit of a taste of what the fire department's about before they invest, because it's a lot of time and a big process to become a firefighter, so, but I think that's really cool that they can see it, firsthand. So we don't have a ton of time. So I want to touch on a little bit about the Holiday Farms fire. What was the most challenging part of the decision-making process on how to distribute resources in such a fast-moving situation?
So the primary thought that goes through our mind when we're talking about resources and deployment is we look at it in 3 phases. One is life safety is our number one priority. Our second priority is property and incident stabilization. And then our third priority is actually the environment and what's the impact on the environment. And so I can tell you, I was in Blue River the first night when the fire came through there. And obviously our first priority was life safety. So getting the 46 folks that were not able to get out because of all the fallen trees and the fire that was moving its way down the McKenzie River watershed. That was our first piece. And then the next piece for us was the incident stabilization and property, what we could say property wise. And that's why we focused on, my particular division focused on the school. We recognize that 1, it's a historic value, but 2 is what it means to the community, and not necessarily the structure, but what it means to the community. And we also recognize it's organizations and institutions like that which anchor a community into recovery. And so that was very important to us, and it was very important to the community as well. Unfortunately, we had similar fires across the state of Oregon transpire. And so in a normal year, that fire, the Holiday Farm fire, would have been our number one priority in the state. And so what we do is if we utilize the department resources first, and then we utilize what's called mutual aid. And so all of the fire departments in Lane County, we have a mutual aid agreement where if someone needs help, we come and help you to the best of our ability. And then if we exhaust all of our mutual aid across the county, then we declare what's called a conflagration. And then we run a checklist, and that goes up through the Office of State Fire Marshal. Then once that's approved, then it goes right to the governor's desk and gets approved there. That whole process takes us less than an hour. So to actually be able to go from that and have the governor say yes on the phone, you need to do that and execute it, is pretty phenomenal.
Wow. Yeah.
And that first night, unfortunately, there were 11 conflagrations declared that night, where typically we would have 1.
Yeah.
And 2 is and three conflagrations is just a bad year overall. So with that, there weren't a whole lot of resources to spread around because everybody else was already at the mutual aid level with the resources they had. What was pretty amazing was how all the fire folks and the community just totally stepped up to go, no, we're going to beat this thing back. And so we were putting a couple hundred local firefighters a day on that fire to keep it, the term we use is keep it in check, and taking advantage of the weather pattern that we had to start shoring up our containment lines, et cetera. So that's how we did it. And then as more and more resources became available across the state, but more from outside of states. So that's why we brought folks in from Idaho, Minnesota, New Mexico, Utah, and even the Canadians. We ended up with about 150 Canadians online with us as well.
So now my last question, I don't have a ton of time. So, outside of the Eugene Springfield fire departments, who are some of the unsung heroes in dealing with the Holiday Farm fires that the community may not be aware of?
I would say someone you wouldn't recognize, or an organization you wouldn't recognize, was Springfield School District. Pretty amazing in how they came up and stepped up and provided the schools and the buildings for the incident management teams. Also, Willamette Lane with the park system and having to set up a base camp there in their areas were all good. The nonprofit organizations that stepped up, but really it was the community.
Yeah.
The outpouring of support was just unprecedented. I'm a firm believer in the Oregon spirit, or the pioneer spirit, and that was demonstrated in Springfield during the holiday farm fire for sure.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons that I've kind of geared my podcast towards more of stuff about Springfield, because I think Springfield and you two are examples of people that are making this happen. But Springfield, really, it doesn't matter necessarily which side of the aisle you fall on. We can all work together. We can all have respect for each other, look each other in the eyes, and work together. And I have a ton of respect for that, that being a thing. Go ahead.
And I'm sure you've met people, right, like who've been in this town and understand the culture of this town and join this town and, just absolutely fall in love with it. And they walk away when you ask them and just sort of shake their head and just say, there's just something about this town and our ability to work together to get something done that is pretty special.
Yeah, I've lived here since I was 11 years old, and my dad, he refused to live in Eugene. And so he's like, for many reasons, he's like, I don't know. And we love Eugene, but I just really am impressed. And specifically the last 10 to 15 years in Springfield, there's been the difference to me is the sense of pride, is a collective sense of pride. There's always been like pockets, people love it, whatnot. They have reasons to like it. But now there's a sense of pride with high school students. You did not see that when I was in high school. So that's really cool. Yeah. Thanks for doing this, guys. For both of you, I really just respect the work that you do. And thanks for coming and talking to me. For Chief Heppel, I just, this really needs to pass, because the fire department, we saw more than ever, the work that you guys do is just phenomenal. So, we're very fortunate. McKenzie Fire, I'm sure, was just going above and beyond. I've talked to quite a few people on that department in my years as a barber, and those people are incredible up there. So I have some personal connections to McKenzie and Blue River that it was really devastating. And I had someone in my chair the other day in the barber shop that he's the head coach for McKenzie football, which, I was choked up a little bit just hearing him tell me some details. And I'm going to plan an episode coming up where I'm going to try to spotlight 2 or 3 different people's experiences on that day. I'm giving them time. I know journalists kind of stick a camera and a mic in their face, and I want to give them time to process it so that we can talk about the recovery process as well. So guys, thanks for doing this. It's an honor to have you both. And so this is ballot measure 20-311. Definitely vote yes on this, so sometimes that can be confusing. So we need to vote yes on. And so thanks for doing this, guys. And I'm going to end this with a song. This is, I just picked a random song of mine. This is me, SelfEsteem BoatWillie, with Green Man.
Transformation. That's okay, it's cool. I've been insulted before without knowing it too. In life's martial arts, I'm looking for the spark, somewhere between Venus and Mars. Southern Willamette Valley, family, Keezy, God is speak. The first church of possibility.